for any Iranian pilot to get into the F-14 program, he had to have 1,000 hours in either the F-4 or the F-5 to even get in the program. But it was obvious that they were never going to have a squadron as good as our squadron in tactics and understanding, etc. They were going to be good enough to fly those things and fight them against the Iraqis and other people. That would be fun, but not against the United States.
412, receive my navigation now from present position direction. Thunder Gently 154 with the climbing throttle 290 and a heading 149. Gently 154, can you confirm your request level please? 330. Stop down.
After the end of '72, I had a set of orders to go to test pilot school. I went to Pax River because in 1967, 68, I was working at a company called Sunstrand, and I was the senior applications engineer on the design of the wing sweep system for the F-14. And I happened to be giving a presentation to Grumman the day they announced on their PA system that they'd won the competition to build the F-14. So I went to Bob Smythe, who was the chief test pilot at Grumman, and I said, hey, I got to fly this airplane. And he said, well, you're in the reserves. He said, you haven't been through test pilot school. He said, I recommend you go back on active duty, go to test pilot school. It's a 6-month course. They require you as a 1-year payback, 2-for-1 payback. So you got to be in flight test for a year. And he said, I don't need anybody right now anyway. And he said, by that time, I'll be looking to hire some more test pilots, and I'll hire you because of your engineering background and the fact you worked on this airplane for the last 2 years for us. I'll hire you. So that's how I ended up back at Miramar. Bob Rasmussen said, he's not going to go to test pilot school in F-4s. He's going to go to the RAG. But now I'm on my way to test pilot school finally. I get there. And the Navy's already got the F-14 at Pax River testing it. I graduate from test pilot school, and because I'm now a senior lieutenant commander, they said, hey, we'd like you to go be the head guy on fighter flight test out at Point Mugu, and you'll be in charge of doing all the F-14 weapon systems test fly, which is where I went. And I'd been there about 2 years, and we're doing the V&V, as we call it, validation and verification of the new tactical software that was going into our fleet F-14s. And that was the first production tape, as we call it, that we loaded into the weapon system. At the same time, the Shah of Iran bought, through however he got around to doing that, bought the F-14, bought 80 F-14s. And so one of the tasks that we were given, myself and my people, were to develop a tape for their weapon system. It was kind of detuned. It didn't have all the electronic countermeasures and countermeasure stuff in it that we had in ours. At that time, they were good allies of ours. The Iranians were good allies. We had, the United States government had put the Shah back in as the king, or the Shah. And so, with Iraq being Iraq and the Russians being the Russians, and they had F-4s and they had F-5s. They had, 1,000 F-4s and probably that many F-5s, and our tanks and surface-to-air missiles and everything else. I mean, they were one of our strongest allies. And so it didn't really bother me that they had them. I never once thought we'd ever be fighting them, F-14 to F-14. We flew over to brief the Iranian Air Force guys and the Grumman and Hughes people that were going to be loading it and maintaining it in the test equipment and the aircraft. We went over to brief them, and then somebody said, "Oh, wow, as long as you're going over there, why don't you take 2 of their deliverable airplanes with you?" So we flew an 8-hour flight from Bethpage to Rota, Spain, and then we flew another 8-hour flight from Rota, Spain to Isfahan, Iran, into Hatami Air Base. We were the first 2. That was ship 3 and 4. 3rd and 4th airplane that was delivered to the Iranian Air Force into Hatami Air Base. And we were the first ones to show up at Hatami. It was a brand new base built in the middle of nowhere out in the desert. And we're taxiing into the front of operations, and they stopped us in the throat of the taxiway. And they got a band and a bunch of troops and a bunch of civilians over there. And they bring this goat out, and they sacrifice this goat right in front of us on the taxiway. And John, who's this grizzly old Marine that's got like 10,000 hours, of 8 of which is in Korea during the war, he goes, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just saw that." And I'm going, "Hey, it's their Air Force. It's that way they bless this whole thing. We are all right. We are the good guys." And so I was there, and I had to go. We briefed them, and then they invited us up to Tehran to brief all the powers to be in the Military Advisory Assistance Group, the MAG as they call it. And there was an Air Force general by the name of Dick Secord. You probably heard that name. Iran-Contra. He was the new guy up there, and he said, "Hey, get up here and tell me all about this thing. You need to tell me all about the F-14. And the F-14 fell under him as the Air Force advisor because it was in the Iranian Air Force. And the Navy advisor had nothing to do with the F-14 program. So I briefed him. I went home. And about a year later, maybe not even a year, I get a call from the Chief of Naval Operations and says, "Pack your bags. You're going to be the new commander of the F-14 program in Iran. You've been requested by the Air Force General." And I went, what did I do to tick him off, It turns out that Whitey Feitner was part of that whole thing, that they had to have a senior officer over there with a background in the F-14 that really knew what was going on, and who was, a grizzled old flight instructor as well. For any Iranian pilot to get into the F-14 program, he had to have 1,000 hours in either the F-4 or the F-5 to even get in the program. And, you got to remember that they speak Farsi, and everything that we taught them was in English at the direction of the Shah, because the Shah wanted everybody to be very fluent and understanding of the English language, because he wanted their Persia, as they called it, to take their place again in the important communes of the world, because at one time they ruled the world. And so his whole goal was to, bring Iran back to the table with the United States, Germany, Russia, and everybody else, be equals. But it was obvious that they were never going to have a squadron as good as our squadron in tactics and understanding, etc. They were going to be good enough to fly those things and fight them against the Iraqis and other people. That would be fine, but not against the United States. I went over there in February of '77, leaving Point Mugu in the F-14 program, and I stayed there as the commander of the team, the group there at Hatami Air Base until April of '78. And I was brought back to the Naval Air Systems Command in Washington, D.C. to be the director of foreign military sales by Admiral John Albus. In September of '78, I was part of a program review in Iran. So the admiral, my boss, and 2 or 3 other admirals and a bunch of people went over there for a program review. The end of August, first part of September, there was what we call progress payments. Every month, the government of Iran would write a big check for millions of dollars on their contract to buy the test equipment and the aircraft and pay for the manpower and everything else that was over there supporting this program. And they missed the payment. And so technically that's a default on a contract between the governments. And so we went over there with that in our back pocket, and we come to find out there's a bunch of problems going on over there relative to unrest in the troops. It was kind of like they were drafted for 7 years, and then when they were supposed to get out, they weren't letting them out. And that generated a lot of hate and discontent. And it looked like things were not good. So we came back to the States. That was the last time I was in Iran. We had some 500 civilian contractors for Grumman, Hughes Aircraft, Pratt & Whitney, Nawasi, North American Worldwide Services, down in Isfahan. Funny thing, I was with the Admiral, and we were having our program office Christmas party down in Alexandria for lunch, and I got a call from this guy that was part of the Defense Intelligence Agency guy in the embassy in Tehran. And I was briefing with him a lot when I was over there. And he calls me up and he said, hey, Hot Dog, I need to have you come talk to us about Iran. I'm going, okay, when next week? Or no? He says, no, right now. I have a car that's going to pick you up in 15 minutes. Be there. So I go up to the Pentagon, and I find out that things are really coming unraveled, and they want me to evacuate all of our people from Isfahan. And so we started the process right then and there in evacuating the 500 people that we had down in Isfahan. We had something like 40 or 50 just involved with the F-14 program. And probably not that many, probably 30 people in Tehran that were part of that F-14 program. But we started that evacuation issue right then. Then, as everybody knows, the Shah left the country in the first part of '79. Khomeini came in, they had a revolution, and they stormed the embassy, I think it was in October of '79. I had 2 F-14 guys in the embassy when it was stormed. Commander Don Scher, and unfortunately I can't remember the other guy's name, but he was from the technical support side from Philadelphia, that were there in the embassy for the whole duration. I had fought to keep them in the United States when they were back in, they were in my office, I think, in June. And I told them to go home because they're not going back. I'd already gone through the evacuation. There's no sense in sending 2 guys back over there again. And about a week later, I got a phone call from a 4-star Air Force general at Sinkyur asking me who the heck I thought I was. They worked for him and his people, not for me. And we had a little argument about that. And he said, well, you got 24 hours to send them, or I'm calling up your boss and let you deal with him. And that boss he was talking about was the chief of naval operations. And I thought, boy, I don't want to put my boss in trouble. So I went and talked to him, and he said, geez, send him. We don't need a battle with the boss. And so reluctantly, I sent him back over there on the Air Force MAG's call, and they ended up being POWs. Not good.
We followed the Grumman Company's success as a builder at some of the world's best carrier planes. The Grumman Hellcat has been hailed as the plane that won the Pacific Theater during World War II. The Intruder and the first swing-wing fighter, the F-111, are two other examples of the Grumman stable. The original F-14A had two Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engines capable of producing a total of 41,800 pounds of thrust. Later models of the F-14 incorporated two General Electric F-110 engines, which in afterburner mode produced a total of 54,000 pounds of thrust. The F-14 Tomcat is considered a large fighter. It's 63 foot long, 16 foot high, and has a maximum wingspan of 61 foot 1 inch. The F-14's cruise speed is approximately 610 miles per hour, and it has a maximum speed of 1,544 miles per hour, or nearly Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. The Tomcat is the military's second swing-wing jet fighter. The first was the F-111. The Tomcat carried a wider range of armament than any other fighter before it. The two 20mm cannons were for close dogfighting. Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles were for targets between the ranges of 2.5 miles to 13 miles. With an 80-mile flight capacity, the new Phoenix missile took care of long-range targeting. Grumman's 303 airframe was extremely innovative for its time, however the engines weren't as advanced. Grumman decided to fit engines that had a proven record. They chose the TF-30. Unfortunately, during the late 1970s, some F-14s experienced very substantial engine problems. They were serious enough to consider the prospect of developing entirely new engines for the aircraft. This would have been an enormously difficult and costly exercise. It was decided that it was possible to make improvements to the TF-30. The improved engines were adequate and effective, and continued to be used in the F-14A model. But they were still worrisome, to the point that the Navy installed a low-cost but very effective alert system of impending catastrophic TF-30 engine failure. Later F-14B and F-14D used two General Electric F-110 turbofan engines with afterburners. Their weight exceeding 10,000 pounds and their high landing speeds, crash barriers were not always sufficient in preventing accidents such as this. This is the Tomcat's second test flight. Test pilot Miller is in the rear seat and Smythe is the pilot. The first test flight was a simple see-if-it-flies affair, and it was really only a takeoff, short straight flight and landing. It was uneventful. The second flight was more performance and handling based. Unlike the first flight, this one was eventful. The chase pilot noticed smoke coming from the rear of the Tomcat. A closer inspection revealed that it was hydraulic fluid. Within a few minutes, the plane started losing functions. It was basically bleeding to death. At about 100 feet above the ground and not far from the runway, the pilots were forced to eject when the plane, Prototype 1, was lost. And from the ground, it looked like this. This is aircraft number 12. It was redesignated as 1X to replace the lost one. This plane was to continue the test program and included the high-speed tests. Smythe, Miller, and the other test pilots were just coming to grips with the Tomcat, and although there were problems, it was fast becoming apparent that the Tomcat was superior to anything before it. However, at this time, the Navy and Congress were not convinced. One of the factors for their hesitation was the cost. The Tomcat wasn't cheap, and it still had problems. Throughout 1971, testing was still in progress, and the aircraft were performing better than anticipated. The teething problems were being ironed out, and the plane's sailability was looking good. This is Prototype 2 going through a routine. Several Tomcats were built with no intention of flying them. They were simply created to be destroyed in destructive testing experiments. It wasn't until June of 1972 that the first carrier tests were performed. After a series of touch and goes, a landing was completed by aircraft number 10. Another problem arose. Number 10 suffered a hydraulic leak with the nose landing gear. This is not what Grumman needed, as the Navy and Congress were still not entirely happy with the Tomcat. This thorn, and the result of the carrier test, was to be flown to the Navy for its final decision regarding the purchase of the plane. A hydraulic leak was definitely the last thing Grumman needed. As it turned out, Congress endorsed the plane that became an aviation legend. If Congress were to have made their decision the following day, it may all have been a different story, as plane number 10 and its pilot, Miller, were both lost. The program continued, and in the later half of 1972, production began and the F-14 entered service in 1973. The Tomcat has undergone many revamps since. In November 1987, the F-14B was released, and it incorporated new General Electric F-110 engines, which solved the engine problems of the A variant. B, C, and D variants followed, and most of the changes in these models were the weapons and defense capability of the craft. The Tomcat was the first fighter to have the remarkable Phoenix missile system. Test operation was called 6-on-6. If the test was successful, the system would prove to be a quantum leap in fighter ability. The objective of the test was for the Tomcat's pilot to attack on down 6 targets simultaneously. The targets included 2 drones that flew at supersonic speed, 3 training aircraft which simulated slower moving targets such as bombers, and another ground-launched drone to imitate a supersonic missile. On the radar, the 6 targets were identified and designated a prefix. From that point on, the pilot just pressed the firing button as the targets became locked on.
Box 1. 1's away. 2's in the air. 3's in the air. 4's in the air. Check the target cam.
At one time, all 6 missiles were in the air tracking their targets. This was due to the 50-mile range of the Phoenix.
6 in the air.
Which was determined after receiving the test data that with some slight modifications, the Tomcat Phoenix combination would, under combat conditions, give the pilot an 80% hit rate. With the Tomcat Phoenix missile combination flying off aircraft carriers, the US Navy was very much at the forefront of carrier power. However, landing the planes was still a high-risk operation. In this incident, the front undercarriage collapsed when this Tomcat attempted a landing on the USS Forestall. The plane is still fuel-laden and probably armed. The other problem is that the crashed Tomcat is blocking the runway for other planes to land. In a combat situation, this could be devastating, as planes returning from a mission could be low on fuel, and the removal of the crashed craft would be a priority. In World War II, planes like this would be immediately pushed over the side. In another incident during 1976, 2 other airmen experienced a different problem. Their plane simply lurched itself over the side of the carrier John F. Kennedy. At the time, the Tomcat was so advanced and secret that the Navy decided to locate and raise the debris to prevent the wreck falling into the competition's hands. There were further Tomcat losses. 3 aircraft were lost in a week-long period in 1996. This initiated a safety stand-down of the Tomcat. The Navy placed interim restrictions on the F-14 in the low-altitude and high-speed environments. Afterburner use was also prohibited for F-14Bs and F-14Ds. The Tomcat probably became one of the most recognized planes due to the Hollywood box office hit Top Gun. Top Gun is in fact a U.S. Navy flying academy. At Top Gun, the best F-14 pilots were given extra training and the chance to fit their skills against other pilots in simulated but very realistic dogfights. What's interesting is that the planes the Top Gun pilots went into competition with had been modified to give them flight characteristics of Soviet fighters. The Tomcat was much larger and heavier, and it's hard to imagine a plane of such size being as nimble as were smaller fighters. In this dogfight, a modified Mongoose and a modified T-38 are to compete with the Tomcat. The 1970s saw development and production of many outstanding aircraft that are still in service with many countries. However, if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.